What happens when one of the most respected figures in Hollywood walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a routine interview, only to find himself at the epicenter of a media firestorm? This isn't a clip from a movie or a scene from a tightly written drama. This is real life, unscripted, and raw. You're about to witness something that pulls back the curtain on the price of public values, the cost of integrity, and the moment an icon reached his breaking point. Stay with us, and if you want more stories that go beyond the surface, more stories that challenge the narrative, be sure to hit that subscribe button to Narrative Nest. Because this is only the beginning. The day started like any other press junket. Denzel Washington, poised, measured, and as magnetic off-screen as he is on it, stepped onto the bright, bustling set of The View. He had done this kind of thing countless times before. Promotion, questions, some laughs, a nod to his latest project, and he'd be out before lunch. That was the rhythm. That was the routine. Only this time, something was different. From the moment he walked into the studio, he felt it. The tension wasn't overt. No angry faces, no audible hostility, but the atmosphere had weight. The kind of weight you don't see, but you feel it in your chest. The smiles were just a little too sharp. The laughter backstage felt forced, as if everyone knew something was about to happen. Something they weren't quite ready to face, but couldn't avoid either. He sat down, facing the semicircle of seasoned hosts. Cameras were already rolling. The audience cheered as they always do, but even they sensed it. There was a kind of silence tucked between the claps, a stillness that hadn't been there in past episodes. Joy Behar led the charge. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the way you talk to someone just before dropping a truth bomb they won't see coming. Denzel, welcome to The View. We're so glad to have you, especially at this interesting time. Denzel didn't flinch. He smiled, nodded, and returned the greeting with warmth and calm. Thank you, Joy. Happy to be here. But Joy wasn't here for pleasantries. Now, she continued, eyes narrowing just slightly as she shuffled her cards with theatrical flair. You've said a lot of things recently about faith, about family, about values. And frankly, it's caused a stir. There was a pause. Not long, but just enough for the audience to glance at each other. What was supposed to be a promo interview had just taken a sharp turn. Denzel tilted his head, genuinely curious. A stir? I'm not sure I follow. Joy leaned back, a smile playing on her lips like a cat playing with a mouse. Some people would say your views are outdated. Maybe even harmful. Silence. For a moment, the air seemed to stop moving. Denzel didn't blink. My views. Let's be real here, Denzel, Joy said, the warmth in her tone now replaced by something colder. You've talked about traditional family structures, your strong religious beliefs, and while that's your right, of course, it sounds like you're telling people how to live their lives. The words landed like punches dressed as questions. This wasn't a conversation. It was a setup. Denzel exhaled slowly. He wasn't new to controversy. He'd been criticized before. But this felt personal. I've always shared my truth, he replied. That doesn't mean I'm trying to define truth for anyone else. Joy didn't let up. But don't you think that, with your platform, there's a responsibility to evolve? You can't keep repeating the same message from 30 years ago and expect it to fit today's world. At this point, the other co-hosts were silent, awkward, almost distant. One of them, Sarah, shifted uncomfortably, as if trying to disappear into her seat. Denzel adjusted his posture, his voice calm but edged with fire. I believe in values that don't expire. Faith, integrity, family, responsibility. I don't think those are bound by trends. Joy chuckled, not kindly. Sounds like a sermon. And that's when the mood shifted. Denzel's hands, still resting gently on the armrests, clenched ever so slightly. You invited me here to talk about my work, my film, my craft. not to ridicule my beliefs. Oh, come on, Joy waved a hand. Nobody's ridiculing anything. We're just asking tough questions. Denzel paused. That pause, long, deep, and unervingly quiet, did more than any shouting ever could. Then, with a tone that was low but carried across the room like thunder, he said, "You're not asking questions. You're making accusations disguised as conversation." The audience was still. The crew had gone pale. In the control booth, producers hovered over mics wondering if they needed to step in. But Denzel wasn't finished. "I came here out of respect. I don't ambush people in my films. I don't write characters just to tear them down. I build them. I find their humanity. And I came here expecting the same." Joy leaned forward, clearly irked. "Then maybe don't say things that make people feel less than." Denzel leaned in too, his eyes locked on hers. "I never said anyone was less than. But it seems like the only acceptable opinion these days is one that mirrors yours." A murmur ran through the audience. The conversation, if it could still be called that, had stopped being about movies 5 minutes ago. Now it was about something much deeper. Something raw. It was about identity. About ideology. About how a man with a different perspective could be so thoroughly dismantled, not because he was wrong, but because he wasn't current. Joy smiled tightly. "Look, you're a talented actor, no doubt. But talent doesn't give you immunity from accountability." Denzel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. And neither does a platform give you the right to weaponize a conversation. The room was holding its breath. The control room didn't cut to commercial. They let it roll. Joy picked up a sheet of paper, brandishing it like evidence. "You said in an interview last year, and I quote, 'A child needs both a mother and a father.' How do you think that sounds to the millions of single-parent households watching this right now?" The trap was laid. It was clever, rehearsed. But Denzel didn't back down. "I said that based on my personal experience. I grew up with a father, a mother, that shaped me. I didn't say it to judge those who don't have that. I said it to honor what I had." Joy scoffed. "Intent doesn't erase impact." "No," Denzel replied, his voice now heavier, more burdened. "But neither does manipulation create truth." That moment, that quiet stand, would become the most replayed segment in the show's history. Not because of the volume, but because of the vulnerability. Joy was quick to pivot, sensing she was losing control of the narrative. "So what? We're just supposed to let celebrities go unchallenged?" "No," Denzel said. "But you should at least listen before you judge." And then, unexpectedly, he stood. Not dramatically, not aggressively, just a quiet rise that seemed to stretch the room in half. The crowd gasped. Joy flinched, not because she was in danger, but because the moment had shifted so far beyond her control, she no longer recognized it. "You're twisting everything," she said. "I'm correcting you," Denzel replied. "And I won't apologize for defending my beliefs." Then he turned, not away from Joy, but toward the camera. "The audience. Us. If you watched this expecting gossip, you got truth instead. And if that unsettles you, maybe it should." He paused one last time before walking off the set. "And if you believe that conversations still matter, that honesty still matters, subscribe to channels that aren't afraid to show you the real story." He nodded. "Subscribe to Narrative Nest. Because we're not here to play safe. We're here to show you what's real." Then he left. Behind him, Joy sat in stunned silence. The crew didn't know whether to applaud or cut. The viewers at home didn't know whether to cheer or cry. But they knew they had just witnessed something that wasn't acting, wasn't scripted. It was truth. When Denzel Washington walked off the set of The View, the silence he left behind echoed louder than any words spoken during the confrontation. Joy Behar sat motionless in her seat, her face still flushed with tension, her jaw tight. The audience, stunned into stillness, didn't erupt into applause or jeers. There was only the low hum of disbelief hanging in the air like a heavy fog. The producers frantically waved at one another behind the cameras, eyes wide, unsure whether to call for commercial or roll on. This wasn't how the segment was supposed to go. This wasn't how any of it was supposed to go. Backstage, the tension didn't dissipate, it multiplied. Whispers zipped through the corridors like lightning bolts. Crew members clutched headsets, assistants scrambled between control rooms, and one executive stood frozen near the exit, phone in hand, mouth agape. The clash hadn't just broken the fourth wall. It had shattered the illusion of harmony that daytime television relied on to keep its audience comforted and numb. But this was raw, and that rawness was spreading like wildfire. Within 30 minutes, the first clips began circulating online. The moment Denzel stood up, the moment Joy accused him of intimidation, the expression on Denzel's face when she mocked his faith, it was all there. TikTok edits, Instagram reels, Twitter threads, YouTube reactions. The machine had awoken, and it was hungry. And just like that, the public divided. On one side, supporters of Joy Behar flooded comment sections with praise, calling her brave, progressive, and unapologetically honest. They said she did what journalists were supposed to do: ask the hard questions, hold powerful people accountable, and challenge outdated ideas. They applauded her courage to call out what they viewed as subtle bigotry masked in old-school morality. But on the other side was a storm. Denzel's fans, and there were millions, rallied behind him with fierce devotion. To them, he had done what few celebrities dared to do: stand tall in the face of media bullying, refuse to grovel, and defend his values without screaming or storming out. Memes declared him a lion among lambs. Edits layered his speech over orchestral music, transforming his calm rebuttals into rallying cries. By noon that same day, #IStandWithDenzel was trending #1 worldwide. And in the eye of the storm, Denzel himself remained silent. No tweets, no press statements, no interviews, nothing. But the silence wasn't avoidance, it was intentional, strategic. Because Denzel Washington understood something most people forgot in the age of 24/7 media cycles. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it waits. Back at The View, the aftermath wasn't limited to online chaos. The network had gone into damage control mode. Executives held emergency meetings behind closed doors. Lawyers reviewed tapes. PR teams drafted statements and carefully crafted apologies, though they weren't yet sure who should be apologizing or to whom. Inside the green room, Sarah Haynes sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. She had tried to interject during the interview, a small attempt to diffuse the growing fire between Joy and Denzel, but her voice had been drowned out by the sheer gravity of the confrontation. Now, she couldn't stop replaying it in her mind. The words, the tension, the look on Joy's face, the controlled anger on Denzel's. Beside her, Sunny Hostin sipped her tea with trembling fingers. She hadn't spoken much either during the interview. Not because she didn't have opinions, she did, but because she sensed early on that this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a collision. And Joy? Joy Behar sat alone in her dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror. She didn't look angry now. She looked tired, worn, as if a piece of her armor had cracked during the exchange and she wasn't sure how to fix it. She leaned forward, hands on the counter, eyes locked onto her reflection. Did I go too far? The question wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but it hung in the room nonetheless. Outside her door, her assistant hesitated with a tablet in hand, showing the skyrocketing engagement metrics, the explosion of headlines, the avalanche of opinions. Some called her a hero. Others said she was finished. But the truth was more complicated. Because Joy Behar hadn't just provoked a celebrity. She had touched something deeper, something primal in the public, a long simmering tension between tradition and progress, between faith and ideology, between speaking your truth and being forced to explain it. And Denzel, he wasn't hiding. He was reflecting. At his hotel suite overlooking Manhattan, Denzel stood quietly at the window, watching the chaos unfold through glass and distance. His phone buzzed constantly. Agents, publicists, friends, pastors, even a few fellow actors who had once kept their distance now reached out with praise and support. But Denzel didn't respond. Not yet. He didn't regret what he said. But he was aware, more than anyone, of what it meant. He turned from the window and sat at the small desk by the bookshelf. An old leather-bound journal sat in front of him. He opened it, flipped to a blank page, and began to write. Not a speech. Not a statement. Just thoughts. Honest ones. What had happened on The View wasn't just about Joy, or even about him. It was about a culture that had become so divided, so obsessed with being right, that it had forgotten how to listen. And maybe, just maybe, the millions who watched that confrontation weren't looking for someone to win. Maybe they were waiting for someone to finally stop performing and be real. The next morning, The View opened without Denzel, but his presence was everywhere. The audience was restless. The air still felt scorched from the firestorm the day before. Joy walked out to polite applause, but it wasn't the same. There were no cheers, no laughter, just a cautious energy. Like the crowd wasn't sure if they were watching a show or a reckoning. Joy sat in her chair, papers in front of her, and cleared her throat. Before we begin today's show, I want to address something, she said. Yesterday's interview with Denzel Washington didn't go as expected. She paused, scanning the audience. There were strong emotions, strong opinions, and in the heat of that moment, things were said that have sparked a very real conversation. About belief, about dialogue, about how we treat one another. She took a breath. I may not agree with everything Denzel said, and he certainly didn't agree with me, but I recognize that what happened on this stage was bigger than an interview. It was a collision of two worldviews, and while I don't take back the questions I asked, I do want to acknowledge something. She looked directly into the camera. We are living in an age where shouting has replaced speaking, where winning an argument is more important than understanding someone's story. I don't want to be part of that noise. I want to be better. A murmur of respect fluttered through the audience. And for a moment, just a moment, Joy Behar didn't look like the firebrand of daytime television. She looked like a person, flawed, maybe, but trying. But the conversation didn't end there. It was only beginning. News outlets dissected every word from the interview. Analysts debated the implications. Commentators called it a cultural turning point. Was Denzel brave or defensive? Was Joy right to press him or wrong to mock him? Was this the death of honest discourse or the rebirth of it? And in the eye of the storm, Denzel stayed silent. Until Friday. That's when the bombshell dropped. A surprise post on Denzel Washington's official Instagram account. No filters, no flashy graphics. Just a video of him sitting in a quiet room, sunlight streaking through the window behind him. He leaned forward, looked into the camera, and said, "We need to talk." The video, just under 5 minutes, was quiet, powerful, and utterly devastating. I didn't walk onto The View to start a fight, he began. I walked on to talk about art, about my film. But we ended up talking about something deeper. He paused. And I'm glad we did. In the next few minutes, Denzel delivered a message that resonated like a sermon but landed like a conversation. He didn't attack Joy. He didn't play the victim. Instead, he talked about listening, about empathy, about standing up for what you believe in without tearing someone else down in the process. Disagreement isn't hate, he said, and silence isn't weakness. We have to get better at disagreeing with love. By the end of the video, Millions had watched. Millions more would. And a single comment underneath summed up what most were thinking. He didn't lose it. He found it. Back at the View, the team watched the video in stunned silence. Sarah had tears in her eyes. Sunny nodded slowly, reverently. Joy. She stood up, walked to the window and whispered, "Maybe we needed that." And maybe they did. Because in a world where outrage is currency and humility is rare, Denzel Washington had done something extraordinary. He stood up. He spoke truth. And then, he listened. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. There were ripple effects still to come. Allegiances to be tested. Invitations to be extended, or withdrawn. And a final, unexpected twist waiting just around the corner. Because when you challenge the narrative on live television, you don't just start a conversation. You ignite a reckoning. By the time the weekend rolled around, what had begun as a single tense exchange on The View had transformed into a nationwide spectacle. The confrontation between Denzel Washington and Joy Behar wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. It had grown beyond a moment of television into a full-blown referendum on how America talks about values, celebrity, media power, and the dangerous game of public confrontation. Sunday morning political shows debated it. Late-night comedians twisted it for laughs. Podcasts dissected every gesture, every pause, every breath Denzel took. News channels lined up panels of experts, psychologists, media strategists, theologians, to unravel the moment and what it meant. But no one could fully agree on what, exactly, had happened. Was it a meltdown? A masterclass in restraint? A clash of ego and principle? Or just a symptom of a culture that has lost its ability to listen? Whatever it wasn't fading. If anything, it was growing. And deep in the heart of Hollywood, power brokers began to pay attention. It started with calls to Denzel's team. Studio heads who had previously hesitated to associate with him because of his open expressions of faith and traditional values were now eager to ride the wave. A-list directors. Major platforms. Executives who once danced around his convictions were now offering him final cut, creative control, and carte blanche development deals. Denzel had become more than a box office name. He had become a symbol, someone who refused to fold under media pressure, someone who could still command respect without conforming. But Denzel wasn't interested in the flood of offers. Not yet. He wasn't looking to cash in. He was watching something else entirely. The public. Because something had shifted. People weren't just watching the video, they were watching themselves watching it. They were rethinking their roles in this drama. Was the public guilty of craving conflict? Had media manipulation become so normalized that even honest conversations were seen as confrontations? Had the world become so politically polarized that a man speaking calmly about his values could be branded dangerous? In homes across the country, families sat around dinner tables discussing the moment like it was a national event. In churches, Denzel's defense of his faith became sermon fodder. In classrooms, media literacy instructors broke down the interview as a case study on bias and framing. But the most unexpected place where the impact landed? Inside the offices of The View. Monday morning came fast, and the staff felt it like a weight pressing on their shoulders. The previous week's episode had broken ratings records. The network loved it. Advertisers? Even more. But the people behind the scenes, the segment producers, the writers, the researchers, were beginning to feel something they hadn't expected. Guilt. Many of them had seen the shift before it happened. They'd seen the change in Joy's tone in the pre-show meeting. They'd seen the cue cards with bolded talking points that had nothing to do with Denzel's film. Some of them had even whispered concerns. But no one stopped it. Because no one wanted to challenge Joy. No one wanted to risk the wrath of daytime television's most unflinching host. Now, they were questioning that silence. Meanwhile, Joy Behar wasn't just questioning things. She was unraveling. In the days since the interview, her public image had taken a hit. not just from Denzel's fans, but from longtime viewers who said they'd never seen her behave with such coldness. She received letters, emails, calls. Some praised her for holding her ground, but many, too many, asked her a question she wasn't prepared for. Why did you try to humiliate him? That word, humiliate, stuck in her mind. It echoed in her apartment late at night. It followed her down studio halls. And the worst part? She didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did. Maybe she just didn't like it. Because Joy knew she had gone in loaded. She had read the interview quotes out of context. She had rehearsed the physical intimidation accusation days before, just in case things got tense. She had planned the ambush. Not because Denzel deserved it, but because challenging someone like him would make headlines. And headlines, as always, meant relevance. But what she hadn't planned was the backlash. Not like this. It wasn't just viewers. It was peers, fellow journalists, fellow entertainers. Even a few former co-hosts reached out privately to say, "You crossed a line." The moment that had once given her power now felt like a ghost following her everywhere. And then, the unthinkable happened. On Tuesday morning, a leaked internal memo from the network made its way to the press. The memo didn't name Joy directly, but it addressed the recent interview with Denzel Washington and called it a lapse in journalistic fairness, with significant implications for the show's long-term credibility. The fallout was swift. Joy's defenders took to Twitter, accusing the network of caving to conservative pressure. Her critics said it was too little, too late. Joy herself was blindsided. For the first time in years, her position, her chair, felt shaky. But even as the media storm whirled on, Denzel remained silent. Until he didn't. On Wednesday night, he appeared, unexpectedly, at an event in Los Angeles. It wasn't a film premiere or an award show. It was a youth summit, hosted by a non-profit organization that helped inner-city kids find purpose through mentorship and art. Denzel had supported them quietly for years. But this night, they asked him to speak. He didn't prepare a speech. He just stepped up to the mic. "What happened last week?" he began. "That wasn't a performance. That wasn't a script. That was just me, and a person across from me who saw things differently." The crowd was silent. We live in a time where disagreement is treated like war, where asking questions is seen as betrayal. But we've got to stop fighting shadows. We've got to stop making enemies out of people who simply think differently. He paused. And I'm not going to apologize for believing in something. Not now. Not ever. Applause erupted. But it wasn't just applause. It was thunder. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. With dignity. Without spite. The clip went viral overnight. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was real. And that reality began to chip away at something deeper. Something uncomfortable. A collective realization that maybe, just maybe, the media we trusted had become too eager to provoke, too ready to destroy, and too slow to listen. And that's when the letters started coming in. To ABC. To The View. To Denzel himself. Not hate mail. Not threats. Letters from viewers. Teachers. Veterans. Grandmothers. Young men in prison. Single moms. Pastors. Activists. People from every walk of life who said the same thing in different words. Thank you for not backing down. Because that confrontation wasn't just about politics or religion. It was about the right to speak without being labeled. The right to be different without being dismissed. The right to say, "This is who I am," and not have to apologize for it. And while Joy Behar retreated further from the spotlight, her team scrambled to control the narrative. New PR strategies were floated, inviting Denzel back. An apology tour. A joint interview. But none of it stuck. Because something had shifted. The power had moved. And it hadn't moved to Denzel Washington. It had moved to the audience. The people. The ones watching. They weren't content to just consume conflict anymore. They wanted authenticity. They wanted conviction. And most of all, they wanted the truth. Even if it was uncomfortable. Even if it came from someone they didn't fully agree with. Because for the first time in a long time, they had seen something that reminded them of what conversation used to look like, before everything had to be a fight, before every belief had to be branded as dangerous or enlightened, before every guest was an opportunity to score points. It reminded them of what humanity sounded like. And at the center of that reminder stood a man who didn't flinch when the fire came. He stood in it. He spoke his truth. And he walked away, not to escape, but to let the truth echo, louder than the accusations, louder than the noise, and louder than any headline could capture. But the most unexpected chapter? That was still to come, because while the world processed what they had seen, Denzel Washington was planning something no one saw coming. And Joy Behar? She was about to face a decision that could either redeem her, or destroy everything she'd built. The reckoning wasn't over. It was about to go live again. Thursday arrived like a reckoning. The events of the past week still pulsed through the media like an electric current no one could switch off. News networks, online forums, late-night talk shows. Everywhere, people were still talking about that interview. But for all the noise surrounding Denzel Washington's powerful stand, something else was beginning to take shape in the background. Something quieter. Something more human. Joy Behar was unraveling. The layers of confidence, sarcasm, and control that had defined her for decades were beginning to peel away. She wasn't sleeping well. Not because she feared being fired. She'd survived worse. No, this was different. This wasn't about job security. This was about legacy. Because what happened on that set wasn't just another TV dust-up. It was a moment people would remember. And for the first time in a very long time, Joy began to wonder, what exactly would she be remembered for? She watched the viral videos of herself over and over, rewound the moment Denzel stood up, analyzed her own voice as it cracked with mockery, listened to the biting sarcasm she'd flung like daggers. And what haunted her the most wasn't Denzel's anger. It was his restraint, his dignity, his choice to stand without striking. It made her own behavior look smaller, pettier, and that feeling, the slow growing ache in her chest, was something she hadn't felt in years. Shame. On Friday morning, she arrived at the studio early, earlier than she ever did. The studio was still half dark. The crew was setting up quietly. Joy walked past them like a ghost. She didn't offer her usual sharp jokes. She didn't stop to adjust her makeup under studio lights. She just walked to her dressing room and sat down, staring. And then, she did something she hadn't done in decades. She picked up her phone and called him. No publicist, no assistant, no cameras, just her and Denzel Washington. The phone rang once, twice, and then, hello, his voice, calm, steady. Joy froze. It's me, she said. Joy. There was a pause. Then Denzel replied softly, I know. Silence. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then, barely above a whisper, she said it. I'm sorry. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't slick. It was raw, uneven, honest. Denzel didn't gloat. He didn't say, I told you so. He didn't even let her suffer in the silence. Instead, he simply said, thank you. Another silence followed, but this one was different. It didn't choke. It cleared the air. I lost myself in that interview, Joy continued. I went after you like you were the enemy. But you weren't. You were just telling the truth. We all lose ourselves sometimes, Denzel replied. What matters is if we find our way back." She exhaled, almost in disbelief. "I don't know what to say." "You just did," Denzel answered. They talked for 10 more minutes. About truth. About television. About the traps of becoming a character instead of a person. Joy didn't ask for forgiveness. Denzel didn't offer it like a trophy. But what passed between them in that call was something more powerful than any apology. Understanding. By the time the phone call ended, Joy Behar felt something she hadn't felt in years. Light. And with that, she made a decision. Later that same day, just before the show was set to go live, Joy asked the producers for 5 uninterrupted minutes. No co-host interruptions. No debates. No commercials. Just her. The studio lights were brighter than usual. Or maybe it was just that Joy Behar was finally stepping into them fully. No mask, no script, no defense. She looked directly into the camera. "For the last 25 years, I've sat in this chair and spoken my mind. I've challenged politicians. I've grilled celebrities. I've tried to use this platform to hold people accountable." She paused. "But last week, I crossed a line." The audience sat motionless. "I let my need to win a moment get in the way of hearing a man's heart. I used my chair as a weapon, not a bridge. And I owe Denzel Washington, and all of you, an apology." Gasps swept through the room. Joy continued. "Denzel didn't attack me. He didn't insult me. He didn't even raise his voice. He stood up because he believed in something. And instead of listening, I tried to tear him down." She looked down for a moment, then back up. "We talk a lot about accountability on this show, but it's time I take some of my own." And just like that, Joy Behar stood up, not in protest, not in anger, but in solidarity with what Denzel had modeled. "I reached out to him," she said, "and he answered with grace." So to anyone watching who saw that interview and felt hurt, embarrassed, or angry, I see you. And I'm trying to be better. The applause was hesitant at first. Then it grew. Not wild. Not performative. Just honest. Respectful. Because people weren't just witnessing a public apology. They were witnessing a rare and powerful moment. A woman choosing redemption over pride. And as the show went to commercial, behind the curtain, her team stood in quiet awe. Some had tears in their eyes. One assistant simply whispered, "About time." Meanwhile, Denzel Washington wasn't watching from a screen. He was standing backstage. Unannounced. No cameras. No entourage. He had quietly accepted Joy's invitation to return, but only if it wasn't about the past. Only if it was a real conversation. When the commercial break ended, the audience gasped as Denzel walked back onto the stage. Joy looked stunned, but only for a moment. Then she stood again, this time, to greet him with open arms. They embraced. Not for the cameras. For each other. And when they sat down, something incredible happened. They talked. Not debated. Not argued. They talked. About art. About conviction. About grace. About how the media has become more combative than collaborative. About how people can find common ground even when they don't see eye to eye. And millions watched. Not because it was explosive, but because it was rare. A real moment. A healing moment. Denzel spoke about the need for media to rediscover its humanity. Joy spoke about the pressure to always be right, and how it can strip you of your empathy. And at the end, as the audience rose to its feet in a standing ovation, Denzel looked directly into the camera one last time. "Conversations like this aren't about winners and losers," he said. "They're about courage. The courage to speak. The courage to listen. And the courage to change." He smiled. Calm. Steady. Grounded. And if you believe the world needs more conversations like this, if you believe in truth, honesty, and stories that show the whole picture. Subscribe to Narrative Nest. Because this is where the real stories live. The screen faded to black. And in that moment, something shifted. Not just for Joy. Not just for Denzel. But for everyone watching. Because they had just witnessed something almost extinct in the modern world. Not rage. Not conflict. But reconciliation. And maybe, just maybe, that's the beginning of a new kind of truth. One that listens. One that forgives. One that builds.